love to welcome Jessica. She is a proud alumna of FIT who credits her time here launching her career in the fashion industry. After graduation, she worked at the Anthropologie corporate offices in Philadelphia, where she was part of a team that grew a business at a formative moment in its development. She moved to a buying role at luxury institutions, including Barney's New York, global brands Balenciaga and Lacoste, and creative entrepreneurial companies, including Opening Ceremony and Rebecca Minkoff. She recently became the Senior Director of Operations and Special Projects at the 15% Pledge, a nonprofit devoted to creating greater equity for Black-owned brands. And she is a third-generation New Yorker herself, and she lives with her family in Brooklyn. Thank you for joining us. I'll let you take the sturdy chair.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Hi all, thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Well, it's fun to be back. This is the first time, honestly, since graduation that I've been back in this building. So
hasn't changed.
A cool experience.
Yeah, FIT needs to work on that, getting the alumni back in here more often.
I feel a little bit ashamed as I say it out loud, so don't
Yeah.
judge me too hard. But
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here now.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you. And also, as I just mentioned in her bio, she just started a new role like 2 weeks ago. So pretty awesome that you could sneak away and come join us today.
Yeah, no, they were excited for me.
Great. Well, I'd love if you could just take us through your career path from FIT to now, and
Sure.
we'll dive in a little deeper.
Yeah. So is most everybody in this room a design major, or is it a mix, merchandising, design?
It's a little bit of a mix, but it leans more design-based.
Okay. So in terms of my career, I started in retail and like a sales associate position in high school and college. I held a few different sales associate positions. And I really consider that the start because I think that experience is foundational and it's really important, and there are a lot of things that I took away from those experiences that helped me throughout my career. I then, while I was at FIT, I had an internship with Barney's New York, which was really exciting for me. For me, that the time was like the pinnacle in terms of like retail institutions. I was interning in the buying office for cosmetics, so worked with a really great cosmetics team during my time there. When I was graduating from FIT, I did apply for a role at Barney's, and I didn't get the position. And I mention that because I think, as I'm telling you the story of my career, I think there's sort of two key messages and things that really helped me either within the roles or getting the next role. And one of them was relationships, and another one is timing. And I think I hear people also refer to it as like persistence, which I think persistence is important in the aspect of like not giving up and not being discouraged. I do also think as a hiring manager, if I have somebody emailing me 18 times about a role, it does get a little annoying after a while. So that's why I frame it more as like timing versus persistence, because as you build those relationships and continue those conversations, you might not get that opportunity the first time, but it may open up down the line. So after my internship in the buying office, graduated from FIT, started searching around for some buying roles. I actually, before graduation, connected with a woman, Lisa, who had been an assistant manager during my time working retail sales for Anthropologie at the 16th and 5th location. Louisa had come to the school. They were having a little bit of a career fair, no open positions at that time, but it was like, oh, amazing, you're at the corporate office now. That's so exciting for you. Let's stay in touch. Good luck with graduation. Okay, so made that point of connection. As I was interviewing for different roles throughout the summer, I was interviewing for some buying roles. Really had my heart set on, that merchandise assistant or assistant buyer position. Just wasn't coming to fruition. Saw a role at Ralph Lauren that was more of an entry-level HR role. I thought, you know what, Ralph Lauren's a great brand. Let me just throw my hat in the ring and see. Had an initial conversation and then thought, let me reach out to Louisa. She's on the HR side. She was working in retail. Let me see what she thinks about HR. Maybe it's something I would like and I had never really considered. So I reached out to her more just like from a place of wanting advice. And she gave me the advice and then said, but also, glad you reached out, perfect timing, we're hiring for that entry-level buying role now. So that was really what helped me get my foot in the door at Anthropologie. So I relocated to Philadelphia. I was with the company for 5 years. I will say, throughout the course of my career, no two buying and merchandising roles are alike. Every company, it functions in a different way, just based on how that organization is set up. And I would tell you it's probably the same for design. It's going to vary based on the organization. So my function as a buyer at Anthropologie was what? Well, at entry level, it was a lot of clerical work, right? Entering POs, things like that. But in terms of the function of like the buying team and the buying office, and as I grew within my roles, it was a really pretty heavily creative partnership with the design team. We worked closely with the design team from point of initial concept, really giving them sort of like our feedback and buy-in, going on inspirational trips pre-season to really like pull those ideas together and collaborate. Looking at color stories and pulling color swatches with our, dedicated color and print team, which is something that's really fantastic when you are working with a larger company that can have an entire team dedicated to that. Whereas when I worked for smaller businesses, you're kind of cutting swatches by yourself from scratch. So that was really amazing and impressive. So working with the design team in-house to build the in-house collection. And then there was also a portion of buying from outside brands, whether we were bringing in the product underneath the brand label or developing private label merchandise with third party. Fittings 2 to 3 times a week, so like really, really hands-on product development type of buying role. That being said, I had very built out, very strong planning and allocations teams, which was wonderful in terms of getting that level of support. But it also meant I didn't really need to start using that muscle yet. But I started using it in other roles throughout my career, which I'm really thankful for, because I think as much as you could learn about every single department and function, it's only going to make you stronger in your role, because then you sort of start to learn almost how to challenge back, right? So if you're like really trying to push for that buy or that design or that whatever it might be, you kind of understand the analysis that goes behind it from a planner's point of view. So we'll get to that in one of my future roles. So that was the role at Anthropologie, incredible experience. Again, I was there for about 5 years. I'm originally from New York. I always knew I wanted to move back to New York. Honestly, just had a personal moment of, I think this is the time, coming out of, bad breakup. And I just was like, this is it, I need to get back to New York and like start building my life there. So I started looking for roles in New York. It was a tough time in the economy. It was, a financial crisis, which again, being in this business, you'll probably go through, a lot of these ups and downs throughout your career when it comes to the economy, and it does impact work and finding that next role or impacting your current role. So, after a lot of looking, a friend sent me a posting for a small company called Brooklyn Industries. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. They're not around anymore, but it was like a family-founded, husband and wife, Brooklyn-based small business. I think at their peak, they had like 12 to 15 stores around Brooklyn.
One of their stores, by the way.
Okay,
I didn't know you were there.
Yeah. So around Brooklyn and Manhattan, but there was a team of like a dozen of us. So going from, Anthropologie, this global headquarters, huge built-out team, 120 doors, just gone international, to like 12 doors in a small warehouse, really, on Hall Street, outside, looking out of the BQE in Brooklyn. So very different experience, but really wonderful experience, because then I got to really understand, okay, here's how you operate in a big organization. Well, here's how you operate in a small organization, right? You don't have all those counterparts and teams. You need to roll up your sleeves. You need to do a little bit of everything. You need to be creative. And it was just really fun, because I was working really closely with a really creative team of designers. I think, one of my favorite parts of a buying role, it's really a 50-50 kind of mindset that you need to have for this role. You need to be passionate about the analytical, but you need to be a product person and excited about the creative. And one of the fun parts of the job is just working with designers and folks that are really creative. I think I knew early on that I wanted to get into fashion, but I was not talented enough or had the skill set to be a designer. So for me, it's really fun to work with those that do sort of have that skill set and creativity. I was with that company for about a year. Really, also, as you go through these roles, I think, I was learning what do I want out of a company, what works for me, what doesn't work for me. I realized pretty quickly it's a little too small for me. It doesn't feel as stable as a company that's a little more advanced in terms of just like sales volume. Started looking for a little bit more of a corporate role again. At that time, Michael Kors was really a hot business. It was the height of the rose gold watch, which I don't know if you remember, but that was like a big moment for that brand, right? Interviewed for a role there. What I also liked about the role was that it was for the outlet business. And for me, I'm also thinking about with each role that I approach, what am I going to take away from this role, right? So like, what am I going to give to the company in terms of like my skill set and the work that I do, but what am I going to take from it at the end of the day and learn from it, and how am I going to grow? So that was a part of the business that I really had very minimal exposure to at that point, so I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to learn. Worked with a wonderful mentor, Michelle Chan. She was a great leader. Only worked for her for a short time, but really like learned so much, and still try to stay in contact with her to this day. So again, just like building that network and remembering that network throughout. While I was at that job, I got a call from a recruiter about a job at Barney's. And for me, that was really still the pinnacle in my mind, like what I wanted to sort of do in my career. I dreamed about, going to Fashion Week in Paris. Ended up taking on a role there, but for sure what helped was, I think, interviewing there for, and actually I think it was the third time. I think I had interviewed for a second role in between. So interviewing there for the third time, and finally the timing was right. It was the right position, it was the right fit, it was the right hiring manager. And I have to say, being able to give them a reference that was internal and say, hey, you can speak to your head of cosmetics. I interned for her when I was at FIT, definitely gave me a little bit of an edge over the other candidates. So there's sort of that like relationship building kicking in. Worked at Barney's for about 4 years. There I started buying contemporary brands and also building out their outlet private label business. And then I moved on to buying women's designer ready-to-wear. Just incredible experience from a buying point of view, getting to go to, the Valentino showroom in Paris and just like looking at these beautiful gowns up close, going to the shows. It was also grueling. I think in a lot of these roles in our industry, again, either side of the coin, buying or design, there is very much this mentality of like, we should be lucky to be in these roles because they are so comfortable. Right or wrong, that's sort of like the attitude. So I would say, as exciting as that role was, the hours were really grueling. It was really hard. At the end of 4 years, I decided, like for my own mental health, I was like, I need to just pump the brakes. Like I'm traveling, I'm on a plane every month, I'm getting sick all the time just from like always flying and traveling, not having downtime. I can't look for other jobs because I don't have the time, so I kind of pumped the brakes. And decided to look for something new. While I was looking, my old mentor from anthropology days, Glenn Senk, had taken an investment position in opening ceremony. So a mutual friend linked us up together. He was looking for a buying director, and that's sort of how I fell into that position. So again, relationships, really just maintaining those relationships and having credibility. Like in the time that you're working with those people, it doesn't matter, and I might just be speaking to some of my like mentors, but also the team that you're working with every day, or your assistant buyer, just like being a good person and making sure that you're treating everybody like sort of equally, I think is really important. Which is a good segue into my role at Balenciaga. When I saw that role posted, I actually had a former assistant buyer that was working there.
Oh, wow.
And I sent my resume off to her and worked for Balenciaga. Again, a very different buying experience. This time it's a buying office that is sort of like a satellite office in the US for a global brand based in Paris. So a lot of my day-to-day was much different than any organization. I would say it was more relatable to being like a business manager. What's going on in our stores every day of the week. We don't have an allocation team. Now I'm doing the transfers and keying them in and telling people where to send the goods to make sure that we're seeing high sell-through in the stores, and making sure that VIP client requests are being addressed, and we're overnighting this gown from this boutique to this for a client appointment. So you're with the product twice a year, placing the buy twice a year, and then the rest is really actually more about just like the day-to-day business management. So that was interesting. From there I worked for Rebecca Minkoff, I would say the unique thing about that company was it was a digitally, it was more digitally advanced than any of the businesses that I had worked with before. I would say on average, usually the e-commerce businesses that I had been buying for, running, were averaging somewhere around 30% of the total business between e-com and brick and mortar, and it was like double at Mikoff. They were really like a digital first brand, so that was really exciting for me because again, always learning, spending more one-on-one time directly with the digital team. I would say the e-commerce director was like my right hand, I was her left hand. We were always in sync on everything we were doing. Yeah, that was a really fun opportunity. That opportunity also came my way from a graphic designer that I had worked with at opening ceremony and thought of me when the position opened, and I wasn't even looking at the time, but she convinced me to come and talk to the team. So again, relationships. And then COVID happened, and like so many other folks, I lost my job due to COVID layoffs. I think a lot of businesses that were reliant on the wholesale side had to make tough decisions pretty quickly to recover from all those order cancellations. So while it was hard, I also really sympathized, with the business owners. I know it's a tough decision that they had to sort of make just to survive. So it wasn't really any hard feelings, and I honestly think going through something like getting laid off is actually a really helpful lesson because it just makes it less scary, because these things really do happen, it will probably happen to you at some point in your career, and you will bounce back. Just again, like, don't lose confidence, don't lose faith, tap into those networks, keep those conversations going. It might not happen right away. It took me 1.5 years to find my next role, but like, it will happen.
Reminds me of a Christmas parties, 2008.
Right.
Everyone was like, "Oh, how are you?" And it's like, "Well, I have a job."
Right.
So that's good because like every other person was like,
yeah, exactly. There's always going to be some kind of like financial.
Let's hope it doesn't
crisis,
happen again. The great financial
this,
crisis
that.
shouldn't happen again in your lifetime. But.
Yeah. And then while I was unemployed during COVID times, I was doing some advocacy work, which I won't fast forward too much right now, but that led me to my current role. So. Losing train of thought and interrupt me. I feel like I'm
advocacy.
also
You just
like babbling on, so feel free to interrupt me. But I eventually landed in a role at the cost. So eventually the retail job market did open back up again, and I was interviewing for a few roles, and I really liked the team at Lacoste. When I interviewed with my hiring manager, we really got on well. I really liked what they were doing from like a culture standpoint as a company. I really liked their head of design and like sort of the direction that she was trying to take the brand. That was super interesting to me. So I joined with the team, and I think while I was there, one of the things I kept thinking back to was that advocacy work I was doing when I was unemployed, and I really felt I was passionate about it. It also just felt like an obligation personally for me to want to stay involved in that work, but it was hard for me to juggle the two. I have a 5-year-old at home, so if I'm logging off for the day, there's not really time for a lot of extracurricular. It's going to my kiddo. So I was like, I need to make this a full-time endeavor. So that is when I sort of started having conversations with the team at the 15% pledge. Are any of you familiar with the 15% pledge as an organization? If I raise some hands, yes, I see a couple of nodding heads. Yeah, great. So for those of you that aren't, the pledge was launched in 2020 by Aurora James. She is a designer and founder of the brand Brother Bellies. I was already sort of an avid follower of Aurora just from, I think, at opening ceremony we had bought the collection, so maybe that's where I first sort of knew the collection and the brand. Followed her on social, and like so many of us, after the killing of George Floyd and all of the protests, she felt moved to action, and she wanted to think bigger than social media advocacy. So she started this organization, and the premise is really, if you take the statistic that about 15% of the U.S. population is made up of Black folks, then Aurora wanted to really go back and challenge the major retailers in the industry and say, you need to dedicate 15% of your shelf space to Black-owned brands. So, that was sort of the premise, and it was really quickly a success. I mean, we have major retailers like Sephora, Nordstrom, Macy's, the Gap that have signed on with the pledge, have signed multi-year commitments to really get to that 15% benchmark. I loved the organization, started talking to the team. We were having conversations early on, nothing really panned out. Again, just kept that line of communication open, let a couple weeks go by, did a couple check-ins, and at the end of last year, they had a role for me. So that's where I'm now as the Senior Director of Operations and Special Projects. And it's funny because I think when we initiated this conversation, I was still with Lacoste. And then as we were planning, I was like, oh, I got a little update for you. So, and I think that's also, the nice thing about our industry is that you can sort of like move and shake and understand if something's a fit for you or not. And, I think for some people there's like a little stigma around job hopping, but honestly, if you have like a good reason for it, I don't think there's any reason to be afraid of anything like that. It hasn't held me back in my career, quite honestly, and I just had a lot of fun. Like, I've been lucky to get to work for all these amazing brands at the end of the day and see the inside of how these different organizations really function. So I feel really actually lucky for having had that much experience.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us about this role.
Yeah.
What exactly are you covering for them?
Yeah.
And I was going to open up their website actually.
Sure. So it's a really small team. We're still only in the beginning stages of the organization. I would say, two of my key counterparts, we have Gavin, who really oversees the department that manages the pledge takers. So once Nordstrom, signs on and we have an agreement with them, really working with them to make sure, are they hitting all of their deliverables, whatever those sort of goalposts are that we've set for them. And then, how are we supporting them as an organization, and making sure that, they have what they need along this journey, looking also to bring on new pledge takers. And then Charmaine is our head of brands, what we call our business equity community. So, I think one of the challenges that they learned early on in the organization is like, okay, if we want these retailers to hit this 15% mark, we have to help build the pipeline of talent and brands, and really making sure that, we might be, giving them a list of, 500 apparel and handbag Black-owned brands, but they need some beauty brands. So like really making sure that we're helping to get that sort of roster. And then also on the flip side, what kind of services can we provide to help those brands and really make sure that they're successful on the journey, and that it's sustainable for them in terms of growing their business, finding access to capital and things like that. So then sort of where my role has come in is like a little bit of the everything in between. So we will have special partnerships that come up. For example, we have a partnership right now with Citibank, and one of the things that we did with Citi was the team launched a pop-up store in Soho in November and December, to really highlight these Black-owned brands. And they realized there's a lot of operational tasks that go behind executing on this project, that maybe would take the person that's managing the pledge takers and the person that's managing the brands. It's going to take their eye off the ball for what they need to do. So who can just focus on getting some of these special projects launched and going. So that's sort of where I'm at and what I'm doing. I think I'll also be writing the job description as I go, because I'm the first person in this seat. So that's really exciting. So yeah,
that's great. Cool. Well, to rewind it back to your time at FIT, how was your time here? What did you study while you were here? And
yes, I was a fashion merchandising management major, which I don't know if they've rebranded or
fashion business management.
Okay.
FMM is now FBM.
Okay. I had a great experience. I loved it. I did the 4-year degree, which at that time was like a 2+2. I don't know if they still do that. Yeah. So, I think I don't know if it's still the same, but when I started in my freshman year, I think there was a lot of attrition after that first half of the year. But I think that's because, by declaring your major as you're walking in the door, right? Like, it's such a focused curriculum that you're getting that it's a really quick way to figure out whether it's what you want to do or not. I think in the early stages of college and early stage of my career, I was very driven and focused. So for me, it was great that the experience that I was getting at FIT was quite focused. So for me, it really worked. I loved it. I had a great time here. I was trying to think about professors and courses, and I have a terrible memory, so I have to apologize. But I had a professor, I can't remember his name. I think it was a product development course. But some of his just advice really stuck with me. I think he really pushed us to not forget that one of the biggest assets that you have as a student here is having New York City as your campus, and just really making sure that you're not taking that piece for granted and just tapping into all that the city has to offer, because that's also giving you an edge against other students that don't get to go to school here. He really pushed us to not be afraid as a student to go to a luxury boutique that might have a doorbell to get in the front door and push that bell. It doesn't matter. They're going to open the door and let you in. You can walk around and look and touch and understand how a garment is made and looks and feels and fits. And that was really important, and I do strongly believe it gave me the edge. Making sure that you're in the bookstores, flipping through all the publications that you have at your fingertips, and everything's at this point now really digital and social, but staying tapped into all of that. Don't underestimate the power of publications, whether it's the style section or the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times. I remember early in my career being sitting on the floor, because we used to have our morning meetings on a small conference room floor in early stages at Anthropology, and the CEO referencing a Sunday Styles article and asking the room to raise their hand if you read it. And I was the only person in the room. And as someone who was just brand new at the company, that was a really good way for me to stand out, because you know what? I got my Sunday Styles section because Professor, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name, told me to.
Isn't that a lot, was it? No.
If it wasn't, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think so. And I kept up with that habit even after school, and that really, it really did, I think, help. So, I had a great time.
Yeah, that's great. Did you do any clubs or anything while you were here?
No, I didn't, and I think that's
Yeah.
the other great thing is it's really, this school can be what you make of it, right? So instead of clubs, I did part-time sales at Anthropology, and that helped me in the long term in its own way by meeting Louisa and being sort of the domino effect for getting that role. So, yeah.
That's great. And are you in touch with anyone that you went to school with?
I'm not. I know. For me, it was a very commuter school mentality. It was I had my friends. I lived here for some years, but not all the years. So I didn't tap into student life in that way, other than Thursdays at the Garden Tavern. I don't know if that still happens.
Does it? I don't know what the Garden Tavern is,
No.
but
it's pretty better. Yeah. I'm sure there's a new Garden Tavern.
Yeah. That's great though. I mean, I think that is one thing that I'm always telling everyone is to just, you don't know who you're going to be in touch with in 20 years, so totally keep up. Do you think that there's anything that you wish you studied more of while you were here that would have prepared you better for the industry?
I honestly think that most of what I needed to be prepared, I got through on-the-job training, in early stages of my entry-level roles. So no, I think the coursework that I did was a really great backbone and baseline. It really familiarized me with terminology within the industry. I would also say take advantage of the electives. Some of my favorite courses that I think back on were honestly creative writing course, a Shakespeare course, a theater course that I was able to take that didn't have anything to do with my career path, but I was able to take advantage of them, and they were really fun. So yeah, in that sense, just the internships. I think if I could have done more internships, looking back, maybe I would have tapped into that, because that really does help.
Yeah, that's great. So I mean, present company excluded with a 15% pledge, is there a company that was a favorite that you worked for throughout the years?
I know this is going to sound like a cop-out, but it's really hard for me. I've been asked this question before, and it's hard for me to pick a favorite because there's really like one experience from each of those roles that I take with me, and that's really special to me in some way, shape, or form. So
Yeah.
it's hard, yeah.
Okay. That's fair. That's totally fair. Did you ever feel like you had a time in your career that you failed at something really badly?
Yeah, I mean, many times, especially in the role of a buyer, like you cannot be afraid of failure. And I would say even like as a designer, like you're going to put stuff out in the world that's not going to sell. That's why there are markdowns. We don't have crystal balls. Like it's an expected part of the business. So you can't take it personally. You can't beat yourself up about it. And the great thing about the nature of the work that we do is like by the time you're reading the sales report and being really bummed out about that information, you're already working on the next season or like the next 2 seasons, honestly. So it's just like you learn from it. You try not to make that same mistake again, and then you move on to the next season.
Yeah, that's great. How about your greatest success thus far?
That one, it's always hard to talk about your successes, right? I would say when I think about successes, though, honestly, I think more about like impact on people and teams, especially at this phase in my career. I'm really proud of the team that I put in place at Lacoste. When I took on that role, the team, was, we're in the time of the Great Resignation, and the team was already sort of on this trajectory of turnover. We had a footwear buyer that had resigned 2 weeks before I started, another buyer that was getting ready to turn in notice. So I spent my first 6 to 8 months really putting our team together. We had a team of about 5 direct reports. But then when I did, I was able to step back and just like be really proud of like the dynamic, different sort of energies and skill sets that each person on the team really brought to the table.
That's great.
Yeah. It was hard to leave. That was one of the hardest parts about resigning from that role for my new role was just like leaving that team because I really like felt good about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Who's the most interesting person you've met throughout your career?
Again, I would go back to like the creatives, like any of the creatives that I came across. Always left the biggest impression on me. I would say my biggest like fangirl moment was getting to meet Dries Van Noten in his showroom in Antwerp. When I was buyer for Barney's, I bought that collection. We would go there twice a year to do the buy. And he runs that business and that showroom and that team. I hate saying like a family because that's becoming like a little bit toxic and like corporate speak, but in that sense it didn't feel that way. It just felt like they'd all worked together for a really long time. It was just a team that was really connected, and he was, as a designer, he was like walking through the showroom while we were having our appointments. Like he wasn't, sitting in some ivory tower somewhere. He was bringing in greens from his garden so that the chef could make everybody a showroom lunch of like salads with greens from his garden. It's like, what is that even? His dog would be like laying in a dog bed while you're like, putting looks on models and taking photos. So that was a really cool experience for sure, and left an impact. And he wanted to sit with me before I left the showroom and look at my buy and make sure I wasn't missing anything, and like gave me real feedback. Like, okay, you placed this pant, but for me this is like the most important new silhouette. I'd really like you to place it 4 different ways and do a little back and forth, but I'm not going to argue too much with him. He knows what he's talking about, and he really also like impacted our buy and the way the collection looked on the floor. And you know what? That was one of our highest sell-through collections for the season. So that collaboration is also, once you can really get into the weeds with a partner like that, whether it's a designer or a brand vendor or a salesperson, it's really nice when you have that payoff and it really works and it feels good that you kind of all got there together. And I feel like honestly the best results are usually a result of strong collaboration and partnership.
Yeah.
I'll also mention this woman, Jenny, that I worked with. She was our store manager of the LA boutique when I was at opening ceremony. And then when opening ceremonies sort of shut down their physical locations, the Dries store, this is why I thought of her, actually took over that space in LA and asked her to stay on running that boutique. And I was out in LA a few weeks ago with my family, and we went to go visit her, and she's just so incredibly creative. I mean, just like on another level, like I could never, my brain just does not function that way, but anytime I'm around her, just like the way she presents herself, you know, she's so into like fashion and music and food and everything, like all the good things, she constantly inspires me.
Inspirational.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from the designer standpoint that you're talking about too, I feel like that's such a great advice and tip to give, that no matter how big you get, having that direct impact with a buyer at the buyer level to showcase your brand better on the floor actually makes all boats rise.
100%.
Your business is better for it, and you place bigger buys with the next go round because of it. So that's a cool story. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
How do you usually keep yourself up to date on what's going on in the fashion world? I mean, you mentioned the style section, but I don't know if there's any other things that you...
I feel like I have like no wise words to impart here. It's probably everything you guys already know and are already doing it. A lot of it has moved to like social. I spend more time than I'd like on social, but I feel like it is sort of a necessity to really like stay in the know, and it's all moving so quickly now. Like I feel like the trend curve sort of, you used to have this sort of like slower rise and a couple, you know, a nice little few, you know, season or 2 or 3 to stay at the peak before, and now it's just kind of like this at all times. So, you know, I also feel like I'm like aging out of the game a little bit, to be honest, guys, which is why even in my personal professional role, I'm like, I'm gonna move away from being like the finger on the pulse person and like leave that to the next generation.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
You guys probably know better than me.
Can I actually ask you a question about 15% pledge? What is the current makeup? Or do you actually know? I mean, it's hard to say at a global level. Of Black-owned business in retail shops in America.
Oh, like what percentage have they hit?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure.
Or like what was it when this started, you know, when the whole thing started?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not in the weeds enough yet to rattle off any stats, but we are approaching our 3-year anniversary, so we will be pulling together some hindsighting, so I think I'll know very soon. But, you know, I think what we know is that it was never going to happen quickly.
Yeah.
So it's not like we expected this thing to launch and a year later we'd be at that 15%
Right.
benchmark, which is why we sort of have these like multi-year agreements with these retailers, because we know it's going to take some time to sort of get them there, and that's the expectation. That's the work that we, you know, have ahead of us for the next, you know, 5+ years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. So you worked in Philadelphia and New York, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
City-wise, yeah. I don't know if you feel like there's anything different about the personalities of the two cities that are noteworthy.
For sure, just from like a living point of view, yes, for sure, very different, 2 different cities. In terms of like the pace of like work culture, work life, for me it was really the same. It's all retail, it's all fast paced, it's all go. You're wearing a lot of hats. You know, you're working a lot. So in that sense, it felt the same. I would say what I can say about not so much the Philadelphia experience, but the urban experience, since I was working for Urban Brands, so they, you know, urban outfitters, great people, Anthropology. Really, in my career experience, it was like one of a kind in terms of like going to work every day, right? So when I started at that company, we were working out of a little brownstone in Center City, Philadelphia. And within that first year,
where the store is?
Close by.
Okay, not like
around the corner, yeah, right off of Rittenhouse Square. Within my first year of being there, all the brands relocated to a big corporate campus in the Navy Yard in downtown Philadelphia. And I don't know if you've ever been there, seen it, seen pictures of it. If not, it's worth checking out. You know, it was incredible. I mean, just like the buildings themselves, they're like historical, architecturally, they're really impressive. Everything is in the spirit of like each brand, so you just like feel like you're like walking into a brand moment. There's shared services, you have a cafeteria, a place to work out, beautiful facility for your production team's offices. You know, we have insane holiday parties every year in this big, huge space. Like, there was really nothing like it. So, you know, if you're looking for a fun experience, you know, I think in terms of like where you're working, like the physicalness of the space where you're working, it might be worth it to look into some companies that are outside of New York City, because that is one of the sort of trade-offs, is like you get a little bit more of that working for one of those types of brands, which is fun.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. passionate about what you did at Lacoste
Yeah.
and prior, and maybe now what you do now?
Yeah.
Both topics.
I think it's changed throughout the course of my career. I think at the start of my career, it was product. I was just so passionate about business, the industry, product, fashion, and just like wanting to be a buyer. That's what drove me on really early. That's kind of what, why I worked so hard and sort of, grew into, climbed that ladder, for each role sort of quickly. As I became more senior in my positions, it became more about people and team and really like wanting to develop as a leader. It's really hard managing teams. There's definitely times when I tripped and fell as I was learning to become a manager, but that only made me more passionate about like doing it well and being a good leader and taking that responsibility really seriously. And then also like there's just a joy that comes from like working, when you get it right, like working well with teams and building teams and partnerships. And then I think, most recently it was about, okay, what's the higher purpose now that's driving me? And that's sort of what led me into more of this sort of like nonprofit space.
Yeah. What can an average consumer do to be more supportive?
Of the cause.
Yeah, of
the
your cause.
mission.
Yeah.
I think you have to actively try. I think we're not at the point yet where it's easy for a consumer to just walk into a store and be like, okay, I'm supporting like a Black-owned brand. I think you have to be thoughtful about it. I think every time you're, when you get around to your holiday shopping or whatever it might be, think about, for every 10 gifts that I'm buying, like, are there, how many of them can I really focus in on making sure I'm supporting a Black-owned brand? I even am now more consciously thinking about it myself, as I'm getting dressed this morning, like, oh my goodness, is there something that I have that's like incorporating this mission? So I think it's just like first having that awareness and then like really kind of being vigilant about like actively making an effort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, not to put you on the spot, but do you have some brands that you want to share with us that you think we should know about?
Well, I would say I would direct you to our website.
Okay.
Honestly, if you go to that Shop Black, so right now for this month, which is the conclusion of Black History Month, and for next month, Women's History Month, we will be featuring Black-owned brands online on our website, where you can sort of shop some of these products and really support these brands. So I think if you have time, it's worth checking it out. I would love to hear what you think too. So,
anyone in the room have any brands that you know and love?
Brooklyn Circus.
Brooklyn Circus.
I don't have anything.
Did you
but,
see it?
Oh
yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I get really inspired by that brand.
Yeah.
Tote and carry.
okay.
Tote carry. Let me start that.
Brooklyn Circus also recently did a collaboration with Gap. So if you go on the Gap website, I'm not sure how much is sold out and it's still in stock, but that's a recent partnership.
Oh yeah. Right? Adult Gap? With this beat. So they're featuring on their site too. Gap's been really branching out, actually. Very cute. Sorry, did someone say another one?
Tote and carry.
I said tote and
Oh,
carry.
thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. Awesome. Any others? Well, keep us informed too. As you come across some, I would love to hear more about what's going on. So on our first day of class, we all set out and we put forth 4 questions that we wanted to ask all of our guests. The first would be, what advice do you have for yourself as a new graduate?
What advice do you have for yourself as a graduate? Oh my gosh. I think it would just be going back to the just don't get discouraged. It's not easy. It is a competitive industry that you've chosen to participate in. So I've experienced so much rejection in times that I've been job hunting, sent out so many resumes in my lifetime. But you know, don't get discouraged. Like the right thing will just be persistent. The right thing will sort of pan out.
Yeah. It's cool. I love all the twists and turns that you share with us, and the, you know, how one thing that you thought would turn into something totally different,
Right.
you know, grew where it was.
Yeah.
What is the most important thing that you learned in your first job?
Ooh. I think what has helped to make me successful is just trying to make an impact wherever I can, big or small. And I think that really shines through. And the example that I'll give is in one of my first, I've actually been my first day at Anthropology in the buying office. I obviously hadn't been trained on any systems yet. I don't really know what's what. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like brand new, just out of college, and know what's going on. But they had a sample closet, and it was a disaster. Like there were just like piles of clothes on the floor, heaps everywhere, and I was like, I work retail. I know how to hang clothes and organize a closet. Like I can do this. So I just threw myself into the closet and started organizing. And the team was leaving for the day, and they were like, "You should go home." And I was like, "I'm just going to stay a little while longer. Like I'm like really excited to be here. I'm just gonna, and then I'll head out." And everyone sort of left for the day, and then our, I guess she was our GMM at the time, Wendy, came up to the closet because she was looking for something to wear for an event that she was going to, and she was like surprised to see me in there. But it was a really nice way to like kickstart our relationship. I probably like wouldn't have had much FaceTime with the GMM yet at that point. And I think it was just a way to sort of show that like there's no task too small. Like if you're there to like roll up your sleeves and really pitch in and be a team player, I think that can go really far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you hate about the fashion industry?
That's a great question, you guys. Really put us on the spot up here. I think it's because again there is that sense of like it's a sexy industry, and there's that sense of like, you know, there's so many people that want this job, that want to work here, that want to be here, and sometimes that can like manifest in like some like negative, just like ways of you know, being treated, quite honestly. So you know, I think you have to again just like stay positive to sort of like keep any of that out of your headspace, stay focused, and you know, again, just stick to that age-old adage of treat others the way that you want to be treated, because it is just about, if you could sort of build those positive relationships, I think that will always sort of help to see you through.
Yeah, that's good. That's great advice. What do you think is the biggest macro trend that's going to impact the fashion industry over the next 5 years? The ripple of the pandemic, or
I mean, I am going to
hope for this.
say, you know, really like supporting these Black-owned brands and really growing these businesses. I would say I also, you know, obviously climate change is really, I think, something that it's our responsibility to keep thinking about in this business. And I also hope that in this industry we continue to sort of, you know, push the envelope and really be the leaders when it comes to breaking down gender norms. I mean, just think, especially with our business, it's like, it's so gendered. You know, you go to a website, it's boys, it's girls, it's shop men's, shop women's. You know, how can we start kind of pushing that, you know, a little bit to, you know, a little bit forward?
Yeah. That's great. I think we would all agree. But I'm actually curious to see what all of you think after reading State of Fashion this week. So we'll see what your answers
I'm
are.
going to read State of Fashion.
Yeah, you should. It's great. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
All right, well, those are all of my questions. So I want to turn it over to all of you. And there, you want to start in the back?
Hi. So when you say Black-owned businesses, do you mean also like POC, or is it just specifically Black-owned businesses?
Yeah, you know what, there is language behind how we define, like how we define a Black-owned business. Um, so that's a great question, and I don't want to give you the wrong answer. But I know that I know that the way we look at it is also, it just has to be like majority Black owned or like co-founded Black owned.
I was gonna see if your About page had any more specific language that maybe.
It is pretty specific though to Black owned, not just general, people of color. Not all BIPOC. Like the mission is pretty focused on Black owned businesses. I don't want to butcher the right language, so I'm gonna defer on that and say, oh, we'll get back to you.
So Nordstrom, no, was not first. Macy's pledged in November 20. Ulta, Runway. Vogue. How have they pledged?
So again, I'm 2 weeks in the organization, so I'm sorry I can't speak to all the specifics of like the agreements, but for an organization that isn't like a multi-brand retailer, it would really be about like setting up different benchmarks and deliverables. So an example that I would think could be, you need to make sure that 50% of the photographers that you're using for these editorials are Black photographers. You need to make sure that the models or the brands featured on the pages. So quantifying those types of things within the publication.
That's great.
Yeah.
And it seems like when just scrolling through this list, like there seem to be a fair amount of like Macy's joints, and then Nordstrom joints, and then I don't know, not that Dillard's not, but Ulta's on there, and Sephora's both on there. They're kind of peer pressuring each other into it, but when they're big partners in crime, or competitors, I should say, are doing it.
And there's also a vetting. There's a vetting from our side too. Like just because you want to be a pledge taker doesn't mean that the organization is necessarily going to take the retailer on. I think they do a good amount of like vetting to understand that like, okay, you're going to do the work. We're going to set forth these deliverables, and we're going to make sure that there's sort of like a report card to see if we're all sort of in agreement in terms of what the relationship should look like.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm just going to your About section, which maybe will tell a more complete story. So it says it started with a post, May 29th, 2020. Okay, here's one thing you can do for us. In May 2020, amid a charged moment in history full of protest and awakening, our founder, Aurora James, took to Instagram. Here's one thing you can do for us. Aurora tagged the world's largest retail brands, asking them for fair Black representation on their shelves. We represent 15% of the population, and we need to represent 15% of your shelf space. So then on June 1st, the ask was large. Here's maybe. So the percent of business owners that went bust in COVID, it looked like 40% of Black owned, 35% Latinx, and then white was only in like the 15% range. 2% of Black owned businesses say they don't think they'll survive. I'm sorry, is that 2 or 20? 21% said they didn't think they'd survive, versus 5 of white owned businesses saying the same. But you can change that. There are 124,000 Black owned businesses that you can buy from, and all you need to do is look. So she targeted her ask at retailers. And then, I wonder if it says here about Vogue. So, I'm moving again. Since that post, over 28 of the world's most recognized retailers have taken the pledge, redirecting $10 billion in revenue to Black brands. That is a very significant amount of money just so far in 3 years.
Exactly.
So this is just the beginning. I should start that. Thank you, Anushka. Or do you have any more?
So I know this is like more of like a future problem for the brand, and I know that this is like a great first step, but like what's to stop like big brands from using this 15% as like a limit instead of a first step? You know what I mean? Like they'll hide behind this like 15% and be like, oh, I'm ethical, when they potentially have like the capacity to do even more than 15%.
Yeah. Well, I think the reality is like they're not even close to the 15%. So it's like we know that the starting point is not even close to where we need to be. And I think that, to your point, I think the onus is really on the organization to keep resetting those goals, right? So like really looking at these multi-year agreements, and then if it's someone that we've sort of set some goals up for 3 years, well, are we going to resign at the end of 3 years, and then what do we want that next 3 years to look at? Is sort of or look like is sort of the good thing about like making those partnerships sort of rolling.
I mean, I also think that ideally the business is going to speak for itself. If the population is not that white people want to be buying from white people and black people want to be buying from black people solely, but at the same time, if there's no representation of your, aesthetic at the top level for these companies, then you're not wanting to buy as much from those stores. Ideally, it's going to be a win-win for everyone because this population is underserved and not getting, maybe the product that they want to be buying. So it may blossom that all boats rise.
Well, and the proposition is that it's just good for business to have more diversity in your offering. I mean, there's been studies that when you look at teams that are less diverse and teams that are more diverse, usually you have more successful outcomes and outputs from the diverse teams because you have people that are coming to the table with different perspectives, different frame of reference, different point of view. So that's also really I think it's also for us what the retailers that have signed on understand that like this is only going to be good for business at the end of the day. Like that's I think at the end of the day we are running a business.
Yeah.
But how can all boats rise? Yeah.
Right. Makes sense.
Just like adding on to that really quick, is there like anything you do to like keep them accountable or like in case they don't meet goals?
Yeah. I think again, I'm only 2 weeks in the organization, so I don't know like all the processes yet. I have to apologize for that. But that's for sure something that we would be looking at again, especially with our 3-year anniversary coming up. Is really like hindsighting in terms of like, okay, like where are we with each of these pledge takers?
Hi, Ben. I have a question regarding your career kind of as a whole. I know you had talked about previously about the communication and connection between the design teams and the business side. So what I ask is how important would you say the communication and connection between business design is for the success of the company, and how do they go about that?
Between the business teams and like the design teams?
Right.
Yeah. It depends on the organization. So like if I was, again, like in my role at Balenciaga, I was more of a business manager, so I never talked to the design team, right? Like there was a whole other like world of like design team that really had no interaction with like the regional buying teams. If I'm talking about a role where I was more hands-on with the product and it was more of like a product development buying type of role, like my anthropology role, that relationship was everything. And I'll also say that like I also felt like it was my responsibility to support my design team by giving them information, right? Because a buyer is going to start every Monday morning looking at a stack of reports on their desk and going through. And I would sort of be able to go to, Heather, who designs our dresses, and say like, hey, this dress that we were all really excited about, it's been on the floor for 4 weeks now, and it's averaging a 2% sell-through a week. Like, it's not it. Like, we need to rethink our strategy if we were going to continue it for next season or add a sleeve to it for fall. Like, maybe that's not the best play. So, or conversely, like, hey, Heather, that thing that I didn't really want to buy, but you pushed me on because you believed in it and I bought it, guess what? 60% sell through last week. You were totally right. Like, I think that partnership is everything. Sorry.
Not really a question since you're like 2 weeks into the job. Congrats. But when you guys are looking for black owned business or brands, have you guys considered looking at like HBCU schools or like black youth clubs or like Up Next designers, since you guys are predominantly looking obviously more to like American designer based brands and companies?
I think that has to be part of our like go forward strategy. I think in transparency also, like it's a startup nonprofit. We're a very small team. There's only about 6 of us, like in-house, and then we get some support from like outside agencies. So I think there's, you know, it's a matter of like having these like, okay, what are the next things that we think we could do to go and take this kind of to the next level? And I think that's absolutely like something that we would be thinking about and considering for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Throughout your career, what is one thing that you would do differently?
Do differently? No regrets, sort of gal. Because even when it was hard, like I always feel like it kind of brought me to the place that I was supposed to be. So yeah, I'd have to think on that. I don't know that I have like something that comes to mind.
I know you mentioned like sustainability a couple of times. Like, how exactly are you incorporating sustainability into it? Like, I know a lot of people just like use it, and it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
So, what does sustainability mean to like 15% leverage?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I guess when I'm talking about sustainability, I'm thinking a lot more about my previous buying roles, and like at Lacoste, sustainability was a big like global initiative, and there was a corporate team and corporate targets in terms of like how we were phasing out certain fabrications and materials that we were using. At the pledge, I'm not sure how sustainability, like I guess, you know, it's not so particular to our specific mission and vision. I'm sure with a lot of other things, like there is going to be some intersectionality in terms of how that plays in with the brands in our equity community, but I have to think about how we do sort of wrap that into our work. Yeah.
Well, even for your previous jobs, like,
Yeah.
do you think like the whole trend of like rise of sustainability
Yeah.
impacted like buying, especially because like sustainability means like technically buying less,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
was wondering how that impacted.
I think, you know, I think you have, there's a couple things, right? I think, of course, a lot of it can be greenwashing, and we talk about this in a lot of the companies and the roles that I've been in, right? Like, are we doing this for marketing, or is it, right? It's like, that's important. That being said, I think you still have to think about how to do it, even though it's like the total opposite of consumerism, right? And we're always just like, it's the field that we're in, unfortunately, is consumerism, and that's like the part of it. So like we know that evil, and that's kind of like a fact of it. But you know, are there things that you can do when it comes to technology and advancements in design, development, and materials that are less toxic? Then like, yeah, then you should think about that and consider, you know, work that into your sort of design and development strategy, I think.
And I mean, I don't know if this is something that you're doing, but obviously if the pledge is helping to advise up and coming designers, hopefully that's blared in. Because I think it's one of the things that every person who's come through here has said, you know, you can't really be in business right now if you're not at least thinking about it. It's just coming down the pipe. But it's not necessarily your mission.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be honest about that. Like, there's, you know,
Only so many missions.
yeah, there needs to be organizations where like that's their focus and that's their core competency. At the end of the day, as an organization, do I think that's going to be our core competency? No. Does that mean it's something that we should be blissfully unaware of? No. So like, yeah, thinking a little bit more about how we are weaving it in. Like,
This is going to be a slightly long-winded question, I guess, but you mentioned like wanting to take away something from every position that you've had, but what's your learning career goal, I guess, for this position, and like you mentioned like kind of job hopping, like where's your next role, or do you want to stay in this position for a longer time?
yeah. I guess I approach this position more a little bit differently than that. I think with my retail roles, it was always kind of like, okay, why would I be excited to take on this role? So for example, I'll learn about off-price. That's a new box I can check. That's something new when, you know, I'm a eventually interview for a new role, I could say, hey, I'm super well-rounded, I've done full price, I've done off price, I've done women's, I've done men's, right? So like throughout the course of the buying roles, it was about taking something away, learning, and just becoming a more, honestly, like well-rounded merchant and getting to that point where I could say, I've done it all, so it doesn't matter what role I'm interviewing for, like I feel equipped to do it. Or, you know, I can take on a bigger leadership position because I haven't only done women's ready-to-wear. I've done, you know, women's ready-to-wear and accessories and this, so like I'm quite comfortable overseeing an entire women's business. So I think that's maybe like just to articulate a little bit more my approach in those buying roles. Bringing up this role though in that context, I would say does feel a little different for me because now it's more like well, what it is more a little bit more of a focus, I guess, on like what I have to offer in terms of, you know, I have that operational skill set that I can bring to the table, even though that's not directly what my job function has been. When I think about the projects that I've executed in my roles, a lot of it is like project management and operational. And I also, you know, I'm going into this nonprofit role that I haven't worked in before, but I'm bringing in this skill set from the retail world, which is very adjacent with their mission, right? So it's like this sort of nice blend. So yeah, I would say actually like my focus right now is more just on like, okay, I think after, you know, 15 plus years of having this career path, I think I have a lot to offer to this organization to really, again, like support the mission of the organization at the end of the day and make a real impact beyond, you know, hitting my, you know, sales and margin goals for a season. Yeah.
What is one goal you would like to accomplish in the next few years?
That's one goal. Professionally, personally.
Both.
Yeah. You know, I kind of just did it, so I think I haven't really had time to step back and think about the next one because this career pivot was really like my my most recent sort of goal. I think again when I was earlier in my career, it was very easy to know like what was the next carrot, right? Like I started as a merchandise assistant. Okay, I know I'm supposed to want to be an assistant buyer next. Then I was an assistant buyer. Okay, associate, buyer, senior buyer. Then I got to a certain level where I was like, oh wait, I don't know if I want that next thing. Do I want to be a DL? Do I want to be a VP? What do those roles entail? Is that exciting to me? Do I think I have the right skill set for that? Like, do I have thick enough skin for that? I'm actually not sure. So I think I sort of had like a recalibration, you know, in my career of like, wait a minute, I've just always been so focused on the promotion, but maybe that's not what I want anymore. And then when I had some time to think back to, you know, the anti-racism advocacy that I was doing during my COVID unemployment period, and you know that felt like more meaningful work to me at this point in my career. That was sort of the next goal that I set for myself. Okay, well then let's make that the 9 to 5. If I don't think I can find time to juggle that, you know, after work and you know in personal time, I need to make that my 9 to 5 to make that a part of my life. So you know, I'm excited to say I landed that job and I'm you know just getting my feet planted. So I don't think I've thought of like the next thing yet, other than making sure that I'm making a positive contribution to the organization and the team.
That's great. Not to put words in your mouth, and I don't think it was someone in this class, but maybe last semester, but I feel like there's often questions about, you know, how parenthood will shift your perspective, and I think that you maybe just laid it out in a great way. You know, you were climbing up the organization and it finally hit you, you know, if I'm taking this time away from my child, and again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but if I'm taking my time away from my child, do I want to be just climbing the ranks for the sake of climbing the ranks, or do I want to be doing something that's actually feeling meaningful and right for me? So, I don't know if that's what you meant.
Yeah. I mean, I think again, it was like part of this was even beyond parenthood, and again, it was just about like knowing that I wanted my work to be different. I wanted it to be more tied into advocacy work, but parenthood definitely impacted. You know, early on in my career, one of the things I loved most about the buying track was the travel. Like I did sick as a dog as I was getting off the plane every month, I loved that I was on a plane every month for Barney's and going to, Milan for 48 hours for my product appointment.
So fun,
and then
yeah.
going to like
You
that
and
was
your
great. And then as a parent, I was like, actually, like I want to be home on the weekend for swim lessons. So like that was a recalibration of just like pace of work within those roles. So
Yeah.
I think your career. I think when I started out, I looked at it as a ladder. Now I look at it as a journey. It's like, it's not always about that sort of next rung. It's like what you thought you wanted at the beginning might change 5 or 10 years down the line, and that's okay. And just, I think it's really helpful to just really stay open to the experiences, and something might come your way that like you hadn't even expected or thought of as a potential sort of next step or path.
Yeah. Any other questions out there? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you guys.
It's very exciting work, and we're excited to kind of see what happens the next few years, and we'll be paying attention.
I hope it was helpful, and you guys can find me on LinkedIn if you have any other questions after this. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you.